Is my volume sounding fine? Otherwise, I can use a earphone.
Perfect, perfect.
It's sounding fine.
Okay.
It's just sounding fine.
JRK, YouTube is on.
Okay. Hello, welcome to this event from wherever you are in the world. I hope you're all well and safe and joining us this evening. It's a great pleasure to have you. As I am Ravindra Kumar, as the Secretary of the TIFR Alumni Association, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to the JRD Tata lecture today. This lecture is a major event on the calendar of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research and has traditionally been delivered by very eminent personalities. We are indeed privileged to have Professor Kaushik Basu to deliver this lecture this year. Welcome, Professor Basu and Mrs. Basu to this lecture. I now request Director TIFR, Professor Ramakrishnan, to make a few remarks.
Thank you, Ravi. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you from different parts of the globe to this JRD Tata lecture this year at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. A special warm welcome to our distinguished guests, Professor Basu, as well as Mrs. Basu. And Professor Kaushik Basu has joined us from the Cornell University. The JRD Tata lecture is a major annual event, as Ravi said, at this institute. It's held on the birthday of a great son of India, Jahangir Ratanji Dadabhai Tata. The institute link with Mr. Tata and indeed the entire Tata family is at the core of the institute origin and history. Mr. Tata was a visionary philanthropist who foresaw the importance of a fundamental research institution like TIFR in India's future and gave the fullest support, strength, resources to our founder, Dr. Homi Bhabha in 1945. Dr. Bhabha later conceptualized TIFR as an institution of world-class excellence in a country just emerging up as an independent nation. The links with the Tata family and the Tata Trust have grown stronger over the years, and we are again at an epochal moment when the institute is venturing full steam in to build a new campus at Hyderabad. We are hopeful and confident that the Tata Trust will again give us the much-needed support and strength as we go forward on this new path. It is our tradition that the TIFR Alumni Association organizes the JRD Tata lecture every year. I'm happy to see that despite the problem caused by the COVID pandemic, the TAA has been able to organize these lectures successfully in the last 2 years. Like in the years before, this year they have invited a highly accomplished speaker, Professor Kaushik Basu, and Professor Basu is well known globally for his academic achievements and has held key positions on important national as well as international bodies. We are indeed honored to have this lecture from you, Professor Basu. I once again welcome all of you and thank you very much for your presence at this lecture. Over to Ravi.
Thank you, Professor Ramakrishnan. Now let me request Professor Dipan Ghosh, President of the TIFR Alumni Association, to talk about the association a little and then introduce the speaker, Professor Kaushik Basu.
Thank you, Ravi. Professor Basu, Mrs. Basu, Professor Ramakrishnan, and dear friends. But before I start, I must tell you, I used to be a student at TIFR exactly 50 years back. I was a student of, my PhD guide is a very well-known person, Professor and Mrs. Basu must have heard of him. It was one Professor Chanchal Majumdar. He was very well-known all over India. Unfortunately, he's not here with us anymore. It's a pleasure to welcome you, sir, to this memorial lecture on the occasion of the 117th birthday of JRD Tata, whose vision, along with those of our founding director, Dr. Homi Bhabha, and India's first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, resulted in the establishment of this fine institute, of which we are justly proud. Over the years, TIFR has lived up to the dream of this trio to have become the fountainhead of India's atomic energy program. Its alumni, who are scattered all over the world, have provided some of the most distinguished physicists, mathematicians, biologists, and computer scientists. TIFR Alumni Association is an association of those who got their degrees here or have worked in its premises over the years. As TIFR only caters to postgraduate programs, that too PhDs, our alumni database is rather small, but though very distinguished. It aims to increase interaction between alumni spread in many areas of the world, strengthen and re-establish the links of alumni with TIFR, collect periodically, publish, distribute information regarding write-ups on individual alumnus or alumna, the progress of TAA, and about major findings in science and research at TIFR. And finally, arrange public lectures by eminent alumni and others. Today's event is in furtherance of the last goal that I mentioned, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's speaker, Professor Kaushik Basu. Professor Basu was born in Calcutta in 1952. After schooling in the city of his birth, he went to St. Stephen's College, Delhi. According to his Wikipedia page, his father wanted him to study physics. Can you believe this? And he agreed to a compromise when his son settled to economics. From Delhi, he went to London School of Economics, where he got his master's and later PhD under the guidance of Professor Amartya Sen. He is presently Professor of Economics and Karl Marx Professor of International Studies at the Department of Economics and S.C. Johnson College of Business, Cornell University, Ithaca, New York. In his professional career, spanning over 40 years or so, Professor Basu has held many important positions. These include visiting professorships at MIT, Princeton University, Harvard University, London School of Economics, and Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. In 2012, he was appointed as the chief economist at the World Bank, a position which he held till 2016. He is a fellow of the Econometric Society and a recipient of Mahalanobis Memorial Medal. Professor Basu has published scientific papers in development economics, game theory, industrial organization, political economy, the economics of child labor, and crafted the traveler's dilemma. In 1992, he founded the Center for Development Economics at the Delhi School of Economics and served as its first executive director till 1996. He has been elected to take over as the president of the International Economic Association in June 2017 and he served a 3-year term thereafter. Apart from his activities as an economist, I was amazed to learn that he created a game called Duidoku, a competitive 2-player version of Sudoku, with which of course we are all familiar. Professor Basu's research interest spans development economics, welfare economics, game theory, and industrial organization. As a policymaker, he was engaged in macro-fiscal policymaking, multilateral policy coordination, and development policy work in several continents. Professor Basu has been conferred with the second highest civilian honor from India, the Padma Bhushan, in 2008. With this brief introduction, it's a great pleasure to present to you Professor Kaushik Basu, who will speak today on the role of morality in economic life, a game theoretic analysis. Professor Basu.
Thank you very much, Professor Ghosh, for this very generous introduction. Thank you, Professor Ramakrishna, Ravindra Kumar. I've been corresponding with Ravi and Dipan Ghosh for a while about this lecture. It's really a great honor and a pleasure to give this memorial lecture especially because it is in memory on the birthday today in 1904, I believe is his birthday, of an absolutely remarkable human being, JRD Tata. I stress the human being first before his business entrepreneurial immensity, because I feel that is an outstanding quality of JRD Tata. Through his career, he would emphasize the importance of goodness in terms of deeds, in terms of words in life. And I have to say, just listening to you all now, I was thinking that philanthropy is one appreciates when there is philanthropy in a top industrialist. But the farsightedness to think that an institute of fundamental research, which is not a contribution to tomorrow's fiscal policy being corrected, but it's a contribution to the nation's future, to have that farsightedness, how remarkable it is. Being an academic, no doubt I'm sensitive to that. I feel India has reaped so much benefit from some of these early institutes, which actually, if you look outside of the few rich countries, United States, Europe, few others, you will not find institutes of this kind, places of learning of this kind as the Delhi School of Economics has. TIFR, Indian Statistical Institute, Delhi School of Economics, these were all built with really a kind of ambition totally lacking in emerging economies. And India's got a huge amount of benefit out of this. I don't think it's appreciated widely how much India has got out of this. And JRD Tata stands at the start of this big venture that started out. So it's actually a great honor and a pleasure to give this lecture. The topic I've chosen is actually a topic I'm working on a lot, and it fits in also with JRD's repeated emphasis about the role, importance of ethics, importance of a moral compass in life. And I want to give a talk today, which is what actually the research that I'm doing after my years in government and at the World Bank. When I came back to research, which is what I've done all my life. It was a 7-year break from research when I was doing policy work. Ideas were beginning to pile up. And maybe because I had seen a deficiency of the moral compass, that the need to work on that, I felt very strongly when I returned to the world of academia. So let me give you a brief introduction of what it is that I'm going to present to you, and then I'll launch into it. A lot of the talk, there is a PowerPoint, which I'll use briefly. A lot of the talk is going to be a descriptive explanation of the role of morals and a moral compass in economic life. By morals, I should clarify, when I do the little bit of game theory towards the end of my lecture, I will of course have to define it very precisely. Right now, I don't want to define it precisely deliberately, but I should clarify, by morals, I don't mean the practice of a religion or the rituals of a religion, any of those. In fact, you can be a perfectly moral human being while being an atheist, while being an agnostic. You can be a perfectly moral human being while be a devoutly religious person. The morality I'm talking about is, there are many people who believe that it is somewhat in the hard wiring of human beings. Even little children feel guilty if they make a promise and then they don't keep the promise. If they cut a deal, I'll do this side of it, you do that side, the other person does it and you don't do. These are the little moral compasses in our heads. Over time in life, we at times push them aside and become completely amoral or allow them to flower. These things are there, and it is this broadly empathy, kindness, consideration for others, the gut feeling that once you've promised something, you should keep it. All of these have exceptions in life. We do make exceptions, but this is roughly what I'm talking about in terms of morals. The importance of this got pushed aside in economics. And by the way, before I get into this, I should also tell you the term also I'm using the moral term not judgmentally. It's too easy for us to treat my morals as the good morals, the other person's morals as the bad morals. No, I'm not going to do that, but you will see my usage as I get into the lecture. I feel the economics profession has played a role in the absence of morality and understanding the role of morality and economic performance. And that's what I'm going to talk about. This would not have been an interesting topic if the relationship was direct and exactly what you want. Most of us like to say that, morality also contributes to economic growth. And when I make a public lecture, I will often say that. But I'm also aware that it's a much more complicated relationship. People have done well economically by cheating, by doing dreadful things. So you, at least individually, you can make economic progress by shedding all morals. So the relationship between morality and economics, even for a country, is a complicated one. Very often, and this after having gone into the world of policymaking, I've become acutely aware the space for scientific inquiry and the space for public statements. In a public statement, I would hesitate to say that, being immoral can at times help you do well economically. Because after all, words trigger action. If then there are people who say, I'm going to be immoral because I want to do well, you hesitate. But the truth is, and this is the importance of scientific discipline, you have to be completely clear in your head and take on the hardest questions, discuss, and then you can come to prescriptions. And one philosophical word at the start, which I use in my own personal life, David Hume pointing out that the should statement, the prescription, can never be deduced from analysis. So the analysis should be done with complete clear-headedness, ruthless clear-headedness. And then the prescription is never automatically flows from that. Then you have to pause and say, what should I do? What should not I do? With that caveat about this important topic, let me plunge in. A little bit of economic history. It's quite interesting, and I believe economists have played a role in pushing morality aside. Today, the economics profession, some areas where economics has made fascinating contributions are all to do with ruthless selfishness and rationality. The discipline was built around that, and we understand that very well. I'll give you one area where I keep pointing out that economics is like engineering, very, very precisely developed. The design of auctions. There are many different ways in which you can design auctions. Auction design is a mathematical discipline which is done beautifully in economics. And when I was in government, I did play a bit of a role in that. When the government was about to sell spectrum, instead of the bureaucrats valuing the spectrum and selling it at that price, I was pushing throughout that let us put it to a well-designed auction, and the value will be revealed through the auction. And actually, the valuation that was done by the bureaucrats turned out to be half of what the market was willing to pay. For this particular segment, I remember we had valued it at 7 billion. It went for 15 billion through a well-designed auction. So that is one area where pure analysis of selfish decision-making is done very well. Economics is full of that. But morals got left aside. Why? For an inadvertent reason. John Stuart Mill in 1776, that's the first pointer over there, made this discovery, which is a stunning discovery. It has been misused massively that, when at first you look at the market, food arriving on people's tables, clothes being sold in shops, you wonder that is there a dictator who's dictating all this? Otherwise, how come the tailor is producing clothes for me, the restaurant is working very hard cooking food, which I will eat, the restaurant will not eat? Adam Smith got an inkling, which was a very beautiful thought, that there are situations where actually you don't need any central authority. You don't need a dictator, a king, a prime minister, or a god. Individual interest can bring about order. This was the notion of the invisible hand. The invisible hand of the market can give order because the tailor working in the tailor's self-interest, the butcher working in the butcher's self-interest, I giving a lecture in my self-interest, all these things can come together, automatically delivering welfare in society. That was the notion of the invisible hand of the market. Now, morals, you got the impression you did not need. Moral compass you did not need. The point is, and I will clarify this just now, it is there in the background, but this was such a stunning discovery. that this swamped out everything else. Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market. Adam Smith himself was very much aware. He wrote the theory of moral sentiments many years before his 1776 Wealth of Nations, emphasizing that, but all that got pushed aside. It all became centered around the power of the self-interest. This created a very exciting, since this is TIFR, I can tell you, a mathematical agenda for economists. Adam Smith wrote in words, massive work, and I think it's a staggering intellect Adam Smith had. He was a very mild person in many ways. You know, and like till today, people speculate, was Adam Smith an atheist or a theist, a believer? We don't quite know. He liked to keep those things to his private self. His dear friend, David Hume, also a wonderful, mild person, was quite loud and clear about his atheism. He would talk about it. Adam Smith was that stodgy scholar, producing the work, lived with his mother, and passed away. His work would later be interpreted, and people were trying to formalize the idea that Smith wrote in words. Can you write a description of the economy, a general equilibrium of the entire economy? And that breakthrough came nearly 100 years later in 1874 by a mathematician, Leon Walras. Walras gave us the general equilibrium system, where you actually describe in equations demand and supply being equated for every good. What will the economy look like? And it's a classic work, first written and published in French in 1874, and then gradually available to the English-speaking world. There was one problem over there, which is Walras could not prove whether this general equilibrium that he described, whether that equilibrium exists or it does not exist. So you're doing an analysis without quite knowing whether it exists or not. And so general equilibrium theory stumbled along without a proof of the existence of a general equilibrium. Can the economy actually get into that and sit there? That proof came another 80 years later, 1954, by a famous paper by Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu. And it's also, this is just a footnote, not central to what we are doing now, is a mathematical result was needed to be able to prove the existence of a general equilibrium, which was not available to economists because the mathematical theorem in this case happens to be Kakutani's fixed point theorem, not Brouwer's fixed point theorem, but fixed point theorem for of the kind of setup where economics takes place with correspondences. That is Kakutani's fixed point theorem, which, if I'm not mistaken, had been published in 1941. And this Arrow discovered Kakutani in a very interesting way. I learned this when I was chief economist of the World Bank, which was mentioned in my introduction. And I invited Kenneth Arrow to the World Bank to give a bit of a history of thought. And Arrow said, Arrow had been struggling about the existence, could not prove. Few years before Arrow and Debreu managed to do it, John Nash realized that in game theory, the existence of the equilibrium can be proved by using Kakutani's fixed point theorem. So Nash used Kakutani to prove the existence of the Nash equilibrium by using Kakutani's fixed point theorem. And Arrow read Nash and realized that Kakutani can be used generally for general equilibriums in the 1954 paper. Let me know. So that's the broad history of the invisible hand being formalized, and I should mention 1954, and around then, over 2-3 years, we saw the appearance of not just the existence result, but another theorem, which is called the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. And this I'll explain to you in words, and it's important to get that in because it's going to connect with my lecture. Dipon or whoever, since you introduced me, how long should I go on with my lecture? Will there be a Q&A? I'll accordingly trim and speed up.
Well,
I think
there'll be a question answer session, but feel free to
Half an hour is all right, right?
Certainly more than that, no problem.
Okay. So I might take half an hour, 35 minutes or so. I'll keep that roughly in mind. Okay. So let me tell you the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics, which all economics students know, but it was actually formally proved by Arrow and Debro, and on which some of the early work is Amartya Sen, Prashanto Patnaik, and others did. A group of Indian economists did very powerful work on that. The theorem says the following. First of all, Arrow and Debro proved the general equilibrium exists, and they formalized Adam Smith's invisible hand. They wrote down certain properties of the general equilibrium that if human beings have certain qualities, like your preferences must be transitive. I'm giving you just one example of an axiom. If you say you prefer X to Y and Y to Z, you have to prefer X to Z. Transitivity must be satisfied. There must be no externalities. When two people do a trade, it must not be that I do a trade, I give you money, you give me the good. Someone else must not get a fallout of that, a negative or a positive fallout of that. No externality. Arrow did this, Arrow and Debro, they wrote down a couple of axioms and showed that if these axioms are true, not only does a general equilibrium exist, but that equilibrium, which happens through the market, prices move up and down. If demand is short, price goes up. If demand is excessive, price goes down. The market equilibrium gets reached. That equilibrium is optimal. And optimal in a particular sense, in the sense of Pareto optimality. Optimal means, and I don't actually have to go into the details, but it is optimal. Some sense it's optimal for the group. So in the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics is actually a mathematical formalization of the invisible hand of the market. That given axioms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you leave the market to itself, no government, price rises when demand is short, price falls when supply is excessive, and the price moves naturally to find the equilibrium that emerges will be optimal in the sense of Pareto. The work of Amartya Sen, my advisor, Prashanto Patnaik, and a whole host of others. Subsequently, there are Bhaskar Dotto. Actually, Indians have been very prominent in this, because I remember when I was a PhD student, the famous Japanese mathematical economist Michio Morishima met me in the corridors and asked me, young man, what are you thinking of doing your research in? And when I said welfare economics, Michio Morishima paused in the corridor and said, oh, India's discipline, because there were so many Indians working on this. Some of the criticism that Amartya Sen, Patnaik, and others have made is that Pareto optimal can have pretty obnoxious states, can be optimal in the sense of Pareto. So that is one criticism, that there are states of the world which are Pareto optimal, but not very nice, can be made. But that's not the point that I'm making. I'm making a point which is, alongside this mathematical description and history, there is a philosophical matter which has been understood very poorly. And to, I feel, the shame of mathematical economists, many of these very deep philosophical matters get pushed aside, because these philosophical matters often cannot be formalized. So they tend to get pushed aside as unimportant because you can't formalize them. But they are very important, and I'm going to open up one of the philosophical cracks in this analysis, and through that get into the role of morality. So in this, the first fundamental theorem of economics, you know that if axioms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are satisfied, free market will lead to optimality. Mercifully, and Kenneth Arrow was very sensitive to this, that the ultra right-wing belief that leave it to the market, don't have the government, don't have community intervention, you'll get optimality is nonsense, because you do need these 5 critical axioms to be satisfied. And it's not clear that in society, those 5 axioms are always satisfied. There are some subtle axioms in there. The no externality axiom is one of them. So it may not be that those axioms are satisfied. A lot of the subsequent research of economists is tweaking these axioms. I will change the axiom somewhat and see if the result continues. Change another axiom, but something else had fallen through the cracks. This is a philosophical point, but it's a hard analytical philosophical point not to be dismissed. In disciplines, and this actually over the last 2-3 years, I've become very interested in this and I'm writing. In disciplines, very often, and I now believe always, while there are explicit axioms and assumptions, there are also implicit assumptions, which are so implicit that people who practice the discipline forget that those assumptions are also playing a role. And I will give you one example that I have written about in the past. You know, if you take rats or mouse, rats actually satisfy most of the axioms of general equilibrium. In particular, that they like to eat more, diminishing marginal utility, they satisfy. There are laboratory tests with rats showing that rats satisfy this. But if you put 2 rats in a room, you give all the cheese to one and all the bread to the other. Is there any trade between the rats? No, rats do not do trade. Rats satisfy all the axioms, but the economy of rats is not a flourishing optimal economy. Rats do not satisfy certain assumptions which are never stated in economics explicitly because we so take it for granted. For a market economy to function, yes, you need those 5 axioms: transitivity, diminishing returns or convexity, concave production functions, etc. You need those, no externality. But you need other assumptions which are never stated. In order to do trade, you need language. You have to go up to the trader and say, I will give you this, will you give me that? But we don't write down as an axiom the ability to speak. Is never written down as an axiom because it's so taken for granted. Likewise, for trade to occur, I can't go into the marketplace and my first action can't be that I punch the other person on the nose and take away everything and run. We don't write down an axiom saying no punching on the nose axiom. That is not there. That's taken for granted by economists. Whole lot of things are implicitly taken for granted, and I describe them as assumptions in the woodwork that people practicing the discipline are not aware of. And morals and norms, a certain amount are critical. Adam Smith was aware of that, but it got pushed aside. Without those assumptions, which we take it to be in the woodwork, a society would do very poorly or very well, depending on how those implicit assumptions of morals and norms are doing. And we give too little importance to that in economics. One analogy from mathematics, history of mathematics, geometry, how implicit assumptions take long to discover. And very often you don't need hardcore trained mathematicians or mathematical economists to discover these things. They are very often intuitive. A philosopher, a poet can stumble upon this. The most fascinating example of this is geometry. Euclidean geometry is written down axiomatically. The counterpart, by the way, of Euclidean geometry in economics is Gerard Debrow's theory of value, which is completely axiomatically written up. The whole book is a set of axioms, and you are then going to theorems till the general equilibrium comes about. That's what Euclid's work, the pioneering work, axiomatic writing down of geometry. For hundreds of years, that was treated as geometry. That there are assumptions in the woodwork, implicit assumptions which were so ingrained in Euclid's head that Euclid never wrote that down as an axiom, was not evident for a long time. One of them is the parallel line postulate, which effectively implied that Euclid was doing his exercise on a flat surface and not on the surface like the real world, which is a sphere. So Euclid's axioms were all being written down for a flat surface, and Euclid never wrote down as an axiom, everything is being done on a flat surface, 2-dimensional surface, was never written down. That was implicit. And it took time for it to be discovered because human beings, once you work on the explicit assumptions, change one axiom, see what that will do. But the implicit assumptions get ignored. And fascinatingly, I mentioned that it does not, one of the first persons who got an inkling that there was this implicit assumption made by Euclid, unaware of, was actually Omar Khayyam, the poet traditionally, but poet and mathematician. Omar Khayyam got that sense. Then before Gauss, we treat usually Gauss as the sort of first work, and then Riemann and others are coming in. Few years before Gauss, Schweikart, a German lawyer with an obsession in mathematics, he later on ditched his practice and became a mathematician. Schweikart sensed it, and in 1812 wrote up something saying that Euclid was using an implicit assumption. And actually he then talked to Gauss, and Gauss immediately understood it fully and developed it beautifully, and non-Euclidean geometry gets born with that assumption gone. And thank goodness we did that, because in the world of rapid travel, if we had not discovered that assumption, we would be making big mistakes on the sphere of the earth. If we were using Euclidean geometry, we would be making mistakes. Now back to economics. The moral norms play a big role, and we take them for granted, and economy would collapse if those norms were not in place, and economy can flourish if those norms are in place. And depending on how well developed those norms are, an economy can do better or worse. We keep talking about getting the fiscal policy right, monetary policy right. Those things are important. But if some of these normative moral practices in a society are not right, or they crumble or break down, an economy can begin to crumble and break down. There are casual introductions to this by, for instance, the work of Francis Fukuyama, which I like a lot. It's a chatty work. And Fukuyama notices a correlation and nothing more, and writes this beautiful book called Trust. Societies in which there is a lot of trust, those societies tend to do better economically. What does that mean? Trust basically means that everything you don't have to write down as a contract with a third-party enforcement. You can just depend on other people. And Fukuyama pointed out that societies which are able to do that, once I tell you, you paint my house and then I'll pay you. I as a painter, once someone tells me that, I as a painter, I have trust that once I've painted, that person will pay. These everything can't be written down as contract in life with a third party enforcement. If you have trust, many more businesses and deals and small ventures will be all over the place. And a trusting society is a society that will do better. So Fukuyama pointed out that Scandinavian countries do so well because there is trust. So for them, contracts, every time you don't have to run over the smallest contract. You can trust one another. That makes it much easier. Society functions well. And these things are not innate qualities. Some human beings have it, some don't. East Asia developed a lot of trust later, and East Asian countries are trusting countries and do well. And later on, economists jumped on to the field, and there are laboratory experiments of groups where this is, I won't get into that, you have trust in one group and there's less trust in another group, and you in a laboratory make them play games. This is a very famous experiment that was done in Israel. Groups were made to play certain games in the lab where if you're trusting one another, you're going to get richer, actually richer. There's a small budget and you're going to make more money, the people who are playing. And it was discovered that Ashkenazi Jews trust one another more. Ashkenazi Jews trust Ashkenazi Jews, and they become richer in the laboratory faster than the Eastern Jews who trust one another less. So trust as a quality is one of those assumptions in the woodwork. One of the first papers, by the way, I wrote when I joined Delhi School of Economics after my PhD I returned, was in Economic and Political Weekly. And I actually thought it was quite an important point I had made, but it just sort of languished. It's something which was a critique of economics. And the question, this is the shortest paper I've written. It has the longest title. The title of the paper is, "Why do we not run away without paying after a taxi ride?" You know, a taxi ride is a short contract. The taxi driver will give you the ride. After that, you will pay the taxi driver. And it's very easy to run away without paying. I know this from my college days because there are friends who had done the experiment, not for research interest, but just to run away, and they successfully ran away without paying after a taxi ride. So it's possible to do that, but most of the time we don't do it. And I remember asking mainstream economists the question that, I can run away very easily. The taxi stops at a traffic light where the driver can't get out. I open the door and I run away close to my destination. Why do we not do that? And I remember the answer from one economist to another, the same answer each time, that we don't run away simply because we are cost-benefit analysis. Just to save that 100 rupees, if you run away, there is a chance that the taxi driver will get down, run after you, catch you, and thrash you. It's that cost that does it, so it's rational behavior. And I kept feeling it's not rational behavior. It's a programmed behavior. Our minds are trained at the end of the taxi ride to pay. And I believe in that because my argument, my Economic Political Weekly argument was, if the only reason I pay the 100 rupees is because taxi drivers are usually quite strong and can thrash me, in the paper I argued, then that opens up another question. After I've taken the taxi ride and paid 100 rupees, why don't taxi drivers say, I will thrash you again, thrash you the way I would have thrashed you if you didn't pay, unless you pay me another 100 rupees. Taxi drivers typically don't do that. You can occasionally get it, but typically don't do that. So somewhere in this change, you have to use either our morals. After you've taken the ride, you're supposed to pay, or at times it's a programmed moral. You don't even do that calculation. It's programmed in your head. And it differs from society to society. And societies where these things are well programmed, those societies can flourish and do well. Another society where this is not well programmed, maybe a taxi service will not happen because taxi drivers are scared that people will run away. So a primitive society and an advanced society, it's not that they are getting their fiscal policy and monetary policy right, but these underlying norms are more mature in the advanced society, not there in the primitive society. We need to understand them. We need to take this research further forward. And the reason why understanding is important is, unfortunately, as in most of life, the connection is not always straightforward. Often a little bit of cheating does help. And the problem is, in a trusting society where everyone trusts one another, if you can be an untrustworthy individual, that's actually a very good economic policy because people trust one another, so it's very easy to cheat people. And if you are the only cheater, you'll probably become very rich because others are trusting and you're cheating. So the truth is, these are very problematic subjects and you need to understand that better. And in closed door discussions, in academic ventures, you have to be completely clear-headed and point out that, at times being moral can be bad for you economically. At times it's good. We need to analyze this. And with that, I venture into this. Having entered this, I'm just looking at the order in which I will do it. Yes. The models that we already have in our head, some models all of us have, that when we make a promise, we like to fulfill it. At times we do break promises. When I say something, I like to tell the truth. Occasionally, I do tell a lie. When you go to a person's house, that person gives you a fantastic dinner, which is awful. The taste somehow got wrong. And the person asks you, did you enjoy the meal? We are usually not honest enough to say that, no, it was a horrible meal that you gave me. We tell little lies in life. We do. Some people tell big lies, some tell little lies. We do that. But broadly, certain amount of norms are programmed. And human society is more successful than the society of monkeys or lions. Large part is because we have these norms. We don't squabble and fight. We can collectively work. How come we have these norms? There are two answers I give. One is the popular answer, and there is a big literature in economics now. Evolutionary game theory is a very big discipline. It was founded effectively by a biologist, John Maynard Smith, and now there is a whole host of work on evolutionary game theory, which is a refinement of Nash equilibrium, called an evolutionarily stable strategy, where you show that certain kinds of traits build up through evolution. A society that does not have certain traits will not even survive, so you won't see that. I also believe that it is entirely possible that the morals that you see in society, which makes for a modern society is possible, is pure luck. It happens, we happen to have it, we human beings. That's the reason why we are seeing one another, otherwise we would perish. So maybe it has not even come through evolution. We have just reached that juncture of society where by luck, we happen to have these morals, and this society will perish one day, the morals will go. So it is possible that it's that juncture of society. In, Emile Borel's The Infinite Monkey Problem, some of you will know that if a monkey keeps at random hitting a keyboard endlessly, infinitely many times, it's close to certain that the complete works of Shakespeare will be typed by the monkey. If the monkey keeps hitting the keyboard randomly, infinitely, it's almost certain, probability 1, that the complete works of Shakespeare will emerge. And there is a small possibility that our world today that we are seeing is that complete works of Shakespeare in the midst of a complete random trajectory of the universe is what we are in possible. But that's not my conjecture. I want to end by having started working on this, I was giving a very informal talk to Cornell's philosophy group. First time I gave a seminar to the philosophy group, and stumbled upon something which is a bit of a paradox. How morality can be actually bad is what the paradox is. And this game is an interesting game. I use the word paradox. Paradox, the word can be used in two different senses. One is a very deep analytical paradox. Is there a set of everything? If you assume there is a set of everything and begin to work, you will bump into paradoxes. You have to make an explicit assumption of a universal set. But those are the sort of deep analytical paradoxes. So I don't make no mistake. This is not a deep paradox of that kind. The game I will present to you is a paradox in the sense it gives you a bit of a shock when you discover it, because it does not fit in with your first intuition. But once you think about it, there's no deep logical problem, but it does present a problem in society. How do you solve it to make the world a better place? And this is the paradox that I'm going to take you into. One second, let me see. Yeah, okay. The paradox is called the Samaritan's Curse. And what the paradox shows is that when people become moral and develop a moral compass, that can, far from enhancing the moral objective, actually harm the moral objective. This is in a game theoretic context, and a game theoretic context is reality. When you're not just an individual sitting in a single room and taking a decision, but you're in an interactive world. You are Kennedy taking a decision, and Khrushchev is taking a decision. You are taking a decision, Biden is taking a decision, Xi Jinping is taking a decision. These are all game theoretic situations. In these situations, if you become moral, the world could backfire in terms of the very morality that you are enhancing. And the moral I'm going to use here in a very well-defined sense. The moral is, instead of being completely selfish, we all learn to have some empathy and kindness for the poor bystander. So when I'm making my dollars, I'm a businessman, I'm making my dollars. I value my own dollars, I want to line my pocket, but I also value the dollars, some delta amount, does not have to be full amount, delta less than one amount it can be, the dollars earned by poor people. I don't want to crush them altogether to make more money for myself. This is the morality that I'm introducing. It's a sort of limited utilitarianism. Utilitarianism will say you treat everyone's utility the same way. You maximize the world's utility. That's good to aspire to, but no one can be like that. Most of us are moral in the sense in which I'm talking about. We have other kinds of morality, but one morality we all have is, yes, we are interested in our own welfare, the welfare of our family, my wife. Since I know my wife is listening, I better say that. My wife, children, I'm introduced in the welfare of this immediate group. In addition, it's not other rich people's welfare that I'm interested in, but other poor people's welfare I am interested in. That's the moral I'm using, and it'll be even more formal as soon as I write up the game. And I'll show you that as people get moral in this sense, it can backfire on the very poor people you're trying to help. So if all of us, taking the advice of Greta Thunberg, begin to be concerned about our future generation in a game theoretic context, actually the future generation can become worse off. And this is the paradox which I've just published it in a paper, and I'm continuing to do some work on this to see what do we take away from this. If when morals backfire, we need to step out of the game and say, well, we have to do something differently. And here's the game, and here's the paradox. And this is really, it's a toy for people to play around with. I don't know how many people are familiar with basic game theory, but you don't have to be, because I'm going to explain it fully to you, including the notion of a Nash equilibrium. That's the only technical bit that I will use. Two persons are playing this game. This is called the basic game. In the game, player one, I will refer to, is choosing between the rows A, B, C. Player one chooses between A, B, and C. And player two is choosing between the columns A, B, C. If I was being more fastidious about notation, I would have called this A1, B1, C1, and player two chooses between A2, B2, C2. But you know the columns are being chosen by player two, the rows are being chosen by player one, and let me make these dollar payoffs. Dollar, rupee, utils, does not matter, dollar payoffs. Inside each box is the dollars earned by the two players. And the left-hand number is always the dollar earned by the player choosing between the rows, and the right-hand number is player two who's choosing between the columns. So if player one chooses B, two chooses A, then the outcome is BA, and player one gets $120, player two gets $80. That's the game. This is a full normal form game or strategic form game, as it is called, two-player game with 3 strategies each. The full game is described. Now, where will the game settle? If the players play it repeatedly, or if the players stare at it for a long time, very intelligent players, rational players, where will it settle down? The notion of equilibrium that game theorists use most commonly is Nash equilibrium. Now, Nash equilibrium is not without controversy. There are many games where I think Nash equilibrium is not the right prediction. The game will go somewhere else. But games where there is a unique Nash equilibrium, and it's a bit more than a Nash equilibrium, it's a strict Nash equilibrium. It'll become clear just now. I feel that's a very good prediction. A strict Nash equilibrium, and I will actually use Nash equilibrium in the strict sense. Nash equilibrium is the following: a choice of action by the two players such that, given that pair of choices, any player who deviates unilaterally does worse, hurts himself or herself. That is a Nash equilibrium. That if you deviate, once you've chosen a pair, if I deviate, I do worse. If you deviate, you do worse, unilateral deviation. Then that pair is Nash. If there is only one such Nash equilibrium, it's perfectly reasonable to predict that the game will end up at that Nash equilibrium. Let's check this game. Suppose player one chooses A, no, and player two chooses A. The payoffs are $102 each. Is this a Nash equilibrium? The answer is no, because player one If player 2 has chosen A, player 1 has chosen A. If player 1 deviates unilaterally and switches to B, or had chosen B instead, player 1 would pick up $120 instead of $102. So AA is not Nash. If the two players were thinking of playing AA, soon one of them would realize that I can do better by deviating and would not play that. Is A, let's see, is CC, is CC Nash, both of them playing C. Can you see it's not Nash? Player 1 can deviate from C to A. The outcome will go from this box to this box. Player 1 will do better, $108 instead of $106. And actually, player 2 could have also deviated. The game would end up at this box if player 2 went off to A, CA, $108 instead of $106. If you scour this picture, there's only one Nash equilibrium, the one which I've smudged with yellow. Both of them choosing B is a Nash equilibrium. No one can do better. Now, let us say that these people have played this game, and then someone, a good Samaritan, comes up to these two players and says that, look, you people are very rich. 100 is a massive amount. Think of the 100 as 100 million or 100,000. This is a massive amount you all are earning. And little bits of difference, 102 or 104 or 106, but these are all at very high numbers. Do you ever think that your actions can have an effect on a bystander or the future generation who will be much more impoverished? And these players say no. So the Samaritan says you should be aware. And here is what happens to the bystander. There's a bystander, very poor person, who lives close to the home of players 1 and 2, who chooses no actions. Think of him as a beggar or an impoverished future generation whose action is unimportant for what's happening today. The payoffs that I've shown you here are the payoffs earned by the bystander based on what the players are choosing. So this A has nothing to do with any choice of the bystander. The bystander chooses nothing. When the other players choose AA, the bystander gets 20. Bystander gets 4, 0, 6, etc. These are the bystanders' payoff. And since we saw in the game, the equilibrium is Nash equilibrium is BB, we know that the bystander is going to get 6 because BB will happen. The players will play BB, the bystander will get 6. And this is where the Samaritan comes in and says that, look, to the rich players, that you're being very mean. This person is dismally poor. 20 would give this person a minimal amount of quality of life. And if you all switched, let me actually take another picture. Over here, I've got both these. Let me move this a little bit. I need to move the picture if I can. Yeah, okay. This has got the basic game that the two players are playing and the payoff that the bystander is getting. The equilibrium is BB, the bystander gets 6. And now the players are being given a conscience that, look, learn to take into account the bystander's welfare. You don't have to think of what the other player is getting. You can be mean vis-a-vis the other rich player. It's a game. You want to win, that's fine. But keep the bystander's payoff in mind. And let's suppose that both these players become moral. Player 1 and player 2 become moral creatures in the sense that they value their own payoffs and they value the payoff earned by this poor bystander. And for simplicity, I'll make the valuation to be 1 to 1. My dollar and a poor person's dollar is $1. A poor person earning $1 is like me earning $1. The other rich person's income, I don't care. I am a business person, I'm playing this game, but I do care about the poor. So I've developed a moral compass. I'm interested in my dollars, but a poor person's dollar is $1. In order to make $1, I will not impoverish the poor person by $2. That I will not make. That's the morality. If that's clear, otherwise you can ask me, you'll have to unmute and ask me. That's the moral. Once the two players become moral, this game took me a lot of time to construct. These are now just easy numbers. Player 1 choosing these, player 2 choosing these, they have become moral creatures. can you see that once they have become moral creatures, the game that these two players are playing has to be rewritten a little bit, because the payoffs, or the effective payoffs, the payoffs in their heads happen to be different. For instance, if player 1 plays A, player 2 plays A, effective payoff earned by player 1 is 122. Is that clear? 102 of my own and $20 of the poor is like my dollar. So the payoff here becomes 122, 122. Let's see what happens here. If I play B and the other person plays A, my payoff is now 124, my effective payoff. I've added the 4. And the other person's payoff is, player 2's payoff is not 80 anymore, but effectively 84. 124, 84. So the new game, after the two creatures have become moral, is this game. Do you see the payoffs have changed? Because each one has added the poor person's payoff in. In this new game, after they have become moral creatures concerned about the poor, but playing this business game with the other businessmen, where will the equilibrium settle down? What's the Nash equilibrium? Stare at it for a while. In fact, I've forgotten, so I'm also having to stare at it. And you'll find the Nash equilibrium, yes. If both of them play A, is that Nash? No. Player 1 is going to deviate to B. 124 is greater than 122. If both of them play B, is that Nash? No. I will deviate to C, pick up 112 instead of 100. And you can check, none of these is Nash. Only Nash is CC is Nash. If you've got C, you will stay with C. So the Nash is what I just marked. That's the Nash equilibrium. And now let me bring the two together. When they were ruthless, selfish creatures playing this game, the bystander was getting a payoff of 6. Now they have become moral creatures, concerned about the bystander, genuinely so. A bystander's dollar is my dollar. But in this strategic environment, the bystander has been pushed into greater poverty by virtue of these people turning moral. This is the game that I call the Samaritan's curse. And extremely important to me, the more I've thought about the world, whenever we see something evil being done, a group of politicians doing something bad, we think of each one of them as bad. But it's a hard thing to think of politicians as good. Most of us find it very difficult to do that. But you can have a group of politicians who are all individually good, but the collective outcome of that goodness is a disastrous outcome on others. It's a harsh thought, but it's a thought you cannot deny, because life has these kinds of games which you have to confront. And the ultimate aim is actually to then see what can you do if this is what is likely to happen, and you are genuinely moral, you have the moral intention. What should you do? Maybe you should sit down with the other player and say that, look, both of us are good Samaritans. We are concerned about the poor, but we are doing worse for the poor. So this game that I created, there's another game which I'm actually going to skip over. And if you want, I'll pass it to you. It's actually called, I'll describe it in words in 2-3 minutes, because I want to just explain a little bit of how to grapple with this game and then stop. I'll be happy to take on question and answers. And the other game, which is there on the PowerPoint, is there in another paper that I'm working on. The game is called Greta's Dilemma, Greta Thunberg's Dilemma, which you'll be happy to look at. And if you send me an email, I'll be happy to send you the full paper. That is work in progress, but I can share it with you where the other one happens. This paper is a published paper, and if you write to me, I'll be happy to send it to you. But let me explain now where I am vis-a-vis this. Once I've become aware of this, and these things sound so difficult for us to take, evil regimes, yet not to think of individuals in that evil regime as evil, but the collective comes out as evil, is what you get alerted to. I actually, in the paper, jokingly, I had a remark which I had to remove because the referees were getting upset by that when we look at the dreadful regime like North Korea, our immediate thought is that Kim Jong-un is an evil person. And maybe, and probably in all likelihood, he is. But you also have to allow for the possibility that it's not him alone. Kim Jong-un with 5 other leaders, they are playing a dreadful game among themselves, scared of their lives. And so their outcome of their action could be disastrous action on others. But that could be not the outcome of their evil, but the game that they are playing. And globally also, when I look at it, when you look at countries that are caught in the tensions between United States and China, small countries caught in this, you think of the standard American view is that it's the evil of China that is causing it. Standard Chinese view is it's the evil of America that's causing it. And it's possible, but the game is a reminder that that need not be also. That too good, moderately good, you're selfish, but you're also thinking of the poor countries. But when you're in a strategic environment, the outcome can backfire. Not only not do any good, but it can backfire is what the Samaritan's Curse game is doing. How do you solve it? We don't want this. So the last part of my paper, the published paper, is a bit of a speculation, and I'll leave with that speculation. With that, I'll stop and leaving it because I don't have a solution. So there are 2-3 things that I've thought about. Is one is maybe what this is pointing to is the importance of ethics, not just the kind of morality that I've injected in this paper is a form of utilitarianism, or what in moral philosophers refer to as consequentialism. Consequentialism, as moral philosophy is, when I'm taking an action, I don't innately classify an action as right, morally right or wrong. It is the consequences of that action on which I want good consequences to come out of it. But the other kind of ethics is certain kinds of actions are ethically wrong. That's called deontological ethics. A hard deontological ethics is I must never tell a lie. Telling a lie is just wrong. I don't know. I am frankly in a dilemma. I started my life as a hard consequentialist. Everything should be in terms of the ultimate consequences. Whereas now I do get caught in situations where I feel no, deontological ethics are also important. That there are certain things in life you have to do as an end in itself. And I have got another paper some time ago called the Escher's Waterfall Game, where this is a formal game construction where I try to show that you get the following problem. By the way, this game is, I'll stop in another 2-3 minutes because I do want some feedback. This game of mine, which I published some time ago, makes use of the axiom of choice and establishes something very interesting, that you can get the following kind of paradox, that every step which is a moral, it makes a better world. Each step, you're thinking of an infinite number of actions. Each action is making the world a better place. But all the actions taken together makes the world a worse place. That is the waterfall game that I had constructed, and the waterfall game, the name is taken from the painting of M.C. Escher, where the water is flowing down, 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 but at the end you realize you've reached the stop, or the stairwell where you're going down the staircase, but in the end you've reached the top. So I argue that there are situations in life where you may have to use rules. Just don't think of the consequence, that this is my deontological ethic. I'll never tell a lie, or I will always keep a promise, no matter what happens. Though in reality also you can think of, there are situations where I know I will tell a lie. Here is an example where I think telling a lie is dreadful, but there are situations where I will tell a lie, and I can give you an example which to me is easy. A man is running away saying someone's trying to murder me. I'm standing here, comes to me and goes off on to my right, runs away saying I'm about to be murdered. And then another person comes with a gun up to me and said, which way did that man go? I think I will tell a lie over here. I'll say the man went this. I shouldn't have said this in public, because now if this is known, the murderer will come and go the other way from whatever I tell the murderer. But more seriously, it is a situation where I will tell a lie. So there are situations where you will break. This raises important questions. The game raises important questions. If our aim is the collective ultimate good for society, just my being moral is not good enough, because we will encounter situations like the Samaritan's curse game. What should morals be? And also, we very often in economics, we talk of the game of life as everything there is in life is the ultimate game of life. But I believe now that there is no such thing as the ultimate game of life. There is a larger game and a larger game and a larger game. So before a gaming situation, we may want to pause and talk to the other partners that, look, we need to play this differently, because if we play this the way we are playing, we will do harm to the body, to the group that we are trying to benefit. And this is a warning, not just a spurious academic warning, that many a good intention, including for our future generations, can backfire unless we pay attention to these kinds of strategic paradoxes and surprises. Greta Thunberg's good intention may end up creating a worse outcome unless we are sensitive to this. Let me stop with that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Professor Basu, for a wonderful talk. And I thought you could still go on because the game is really interesting. But yeah, we will take some questions. So there are some questions.
I will. There's another game, but actually that game you'll pick up very easily. So I'm not wasting time. But if the need arises, I can do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So we will take some questions. There are some already posted on the chat box. But, it might be more lively if you unmute yourself and ask those questions. Mr. Vaidya, you had a question?
Yeah, Professor Basu, my question is that in India, there was a realm of Gandhian economics expanded by Dr. J.C. Kumarappa, who was trained at London School of Economics. And Vinobaji expanded this. And I asked this question to Ahluwalia at a meeting in terms of village development of India and the need for village uplift getting priority. And he said that all these ideas are romantic. And what I would like to know from your vast experience as advisor to the World Bank, that Indian welfare economists, are they only welfare economists, or their views are also conditioning of their own spiritual background, life and experiences and beliefs?
Yeah, this is such a broad question, I will say, and not just Indian, to think of Indian economists as a particular kind of mind. All disciplines have the same thing. Once you've lived the life in your discipline, you're not aware of the conditioning that has taken place. That'll be true of a physicist, that'll be true of a mathematician. I'll notice it in a physicist, I won't notice it in an economist, because I'm a part of this. But here is the thing, first of all, that I'm not spiritual at all. I should make it very clear. I do think I'm a moral person. For me, the moral compass is very, very important, but I'm not spiritual at all. I'm completely mystified by the world beyond. I don't understand. And it's so baffling that I just retreat, saying that, no, it's out there. Maybe many economists may be like that. But here is the question you're asking, and rather interesting question, which I used to feel when I was in government. By the way, I did do more of bringing in some of these social activists, leading lives, very difficult lives out there in villages and all, into government, getting them to sit with Pranab Mukherjee and have discussions. I had started a regular forum for that. And since you're asking this, an interesting thing that I must tell you, I would bring them in, but occasionally I would also get frustrated, because here is the problem, that intentions, some of the most noble intentions, I do want them on the table. That's why I would bring them to the Ministry of Finance. But you have to play them with awareness of the way the world is. And I would very often fear that some of these most noble persons, they would push you to do things which ultimately would backfire. And I take examples and difficult examples in history because these backfired so badly we can't think of the origins as good. Take the Russian Revolution. Originally it begins with a lot of noble ambition that you want welfare, equality, distribution. In the end, it backfires massively. And Russia, in the end, became a crony capitalist society, exactly the opposite of what the founding fathers were trying. And I feel it is because these intentions would backfire. And with many of these activists, some of whom actually live in rural areas, in their Ministry of Finance, I had wonderful discussions because I think they sensed that I like their motivation. I like their sacrifice. But I would also argue with them that, you know, if you try to carry this out the way you're saying, you will not reach the world you're trying to create, it's going to backfire. Examples of that are there. You know, in India, the biggest example of that is the demonetization. I feel the intention was good, but nothing was thought through about what that means. And it's a massive backfiring, which caused a 4 or 5 year setback. And so good or bad intentions, you have to put on that hard hat in the end. But what you're saying, I take to heart, Professor Vaidya, you need both those. You have to keep the moral compass in your head. So spiritual or not, I don't know since I'm not, but the moral compass, compassion, these are very, very important traits. With that, you also have to wear the hard hat of a scientist, of an analyst. And I have to say, many economists have one on and don't have the other on, and that is disappointing.
Yeah, okay. So there are other questions from Dr. A.P. Jayaraman. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Professor Basu, my question is about the Kerala model of welfare development recommended by Amartya Sen. We have high Scandinavian HDI and low per capita energy consumption, and a fairly stable welfare state has been created. Will this society be stable because the Scandinavian trust factor is missing in Kerala? So this contradiction between lack of trust in the Keralese population and the high HDI created, how will you reconcile this paradox?
Yeah, good question. Again, no very clear answer, but this is what I'll tell you. Actually, there's one example in Amartya Sen's work and some of Gendre's work also. There's the Kerala model, and before that, they talk of the Sri Lanka model, which is very similar. Up to 1977, Sri Lanka was on a path which is Kerala, Sri Lanka, very similar. Standard of living, very high. Literacy, very high. Life expectancy, very high. But there are certain other things missing. And Sri Lanka did backfire. It's just unwound. Kerala is in a treacherous place. But I'll tell you my own, these are such broad questions that there won't be sort of this or that answer. My own sympathies, again, I like this aspect of the Kerala model, the investment in the people. That fact that literacy has been given a huge amount of importance, education is given importance, basic health is given importance. But I'm also aware that unless some other components are there, that could backfire. But even if that backfires by aspects of Kerala society, I am in support. So I would not say that if you can't have trust like the Scandinavian one, remove basic education, healthcare, adopt another country's model. I would not say that. I feel that what Kerala has done is worthwhile, but Kerala has to be smart enough to realize that there are these other traits that you need. So begin to build them in. Don't give up on this. That's broadly the recommendation I will give. And, you know, in contemporary world, another country, much more treacherous situation, Bangladesh is in a somewhat similar path it is taking. Bangladesh has overtaken India on most of standard of living indicators. Life expectancy is now 3 years higher than Indians. Very surprising, not higher than Kerala. Kerala is still higher. But if you take the Indian average, Bangladesh is 3 years higher. Literacy, it has overtaken. So many of those kinds of quality, it is doing that. But if there are certain other things that Bangladesh can't get in place, it could backfire. Despite all these qualities, it need not move forward. So that's the broad answer, that there are these complementary policies. You have to be very careful. And with the communists, since you mentioned Kerala, during my government days, I would sit down with the Bengal government, Buddhadev and all, very well-meaning, wanting to do the right things. But I also often would feel that they have to get a bit more of hard-headed economics in place, because otherwise in the long run, it will backfire. So yeah, I'm stopping with that. And if you have further, I'll be happy to engage.
Okay, there's a question from Dr. Kishore Khanna.
Professor Basu.
Thank you, Professor Basu, for your wonderful lecture. My question for you is, based on your opinion, is morality a well-defined unconditional construct, and there exists a unit set of fundamental axioms on morality? If yes, then it will be easy. But if no, then how can we operationalize your ideas?
Yeah. So Kishore, good to see you. Short answer to the first part. A well-defined general morality is not there. And the big, which is, I'm new to this literature. Because of my interest, I've begun reading a lot in the moral philosophers' writings. Some of it is fascinating, analytically very deep. Some of it is, to me, too wordy. I can't follow when it is that. It is not there. But it is not there, not because of the deficiency of the moral philosopher, but because of the way the world is. A moral is not a well-defined term. And after all, we do know, Kishore, that in the world, some of the worst warfares have taken place when they are moral warfares. I'm standing up for my moral principles, you're standing up for your moral principles. So there are certain kinds of morals, very often religious morals have led to the worst kinds of warfare and brutality. It is moral warfare. But if you move away from those kinds of morality to something which is more common, and I was taking examples. So the way I approach it is when I do a sort of formal game theoretic work, I'll give the morality a very well-defined shape. And over here in the exercise that I just did, a moral person is a person who gives a weight of delta greater than 0 to a poor person's dollar to make it comparable to one's own dollar. And that's a simple definition that allows me to do the game theory. But in reality, I'm aware that it is much more complicated. After all, even vis-a-vis my opponent, I will say that in some ways, beating the opponent and making money, if it's another businessman, it's fine. But I will also say that certain ways is wrong. So it is more complex. But what many moral philosophers argue, I do believe, that we do have an moral instinct. Almost the fact that individuals can talk, individuals have morals. Even children, as they are growing up, they begin to develop morals. And we recognize that this is a moral sense which the child has developed. Not exactly the moral that I have, not exactly the moral that another child has, but the child has. And so the fact that I cannot define it should not be a reason that we dismiss it. Just like early zoologists who could not define an elephant, but they could recognize an elephant. I'm at that stage when I can recognize morals, but I can't define it hard. What I do is every time I get into a hard analytical exercise, I define it and I actually work with it. But it's that stage of inquiry. My big thing, I feel this is a big research agenda. In economics, since you're from an economics background, I will say selfishness was given such a central pedestal that all our analysis is around selfishness. And it has given us some very good, like say the global commons problem, how to solve the commons problem with all selfish individuals. What do you do about the environment? You've got some important insights, but it's too focused on selfishness. We need to focus on morals, and the focus on morals is intellectually interesting precisely for the reason that it's not an easy answer. Have morals, will do well. That is unfortunately not the way the world is. So we need to understand to do well using the models. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Yeah, there's a question from Professor Spentavadia. Spenta, would you like to ask it yourself?
Yes. It's Lina's question. So
actually, yeah.
Lina and Spentavadia.
My question, if I may ask, Professor Basu, I just wanted to ask about, what should we be doing going ahead with the farmers and their agitation. And the reason I'm asking is because it seems that India has a chance to lead with a new model to develop sustainably, in which the farmers continue to do what they do now, which is farm small tracts of land. I mean, we say that 56% of individuals contribute only 14% of the GDP, so it's inefficient and so on. But the US experience with industrial agriculture has shown us how unsustainable that is. So how should we be moving forward? Because we are in a stalemate situation, and many of us don't really have the education we need to take the right sides or advocate for the right solutions.
Yeah, the questions are getting progressively harder. So let me try to give somewhat of an answer to this. This is a field I was very interested in, Ms. Wadia, when I was in government, and I've continued to be interested. One thing I should tell you upfront, which I feel has to be, since you gave that figure, 14% and 56%, what she referred to for the audience larger is, if you take India's GDP, the amount that comes out of agriculture is 14% or 12% or something like that. Whereas of the labor force, the fraction that is in agriculture is 56%, over 50%. So from that immediately follows that the productivity of agricultural workers is lower than other workers, because a large fraction of the workers producing much smaller part of GDP. One thing I do believe is we can't afford to have so many people in agriculture. And this is a worldwide standard trend you have seen in every country, that as a country develops, the fraction of the GDP that is agricultural becomes smaller and smaller. India's case, I happen to know at the time of independence of GDP, about 40% was agricultural product. India has become much richer now since then, and it's about 14% or 12% is agricultural product, so that will shrink. With that, mechanization and things like that means labor ought to exit that. For that, the path that India should have taken, and this is a bit of a long run failure, is our manufacturing sector. We've done very well in the services sector. Our manufacturing sector should have been absorbing this labor so that the agriculture does not remain so heavily loaded, so these people begin to move in. We did not do that well enough. And many reasons. One fascinating reason I will give you, I believe I'm in a minority, I know among economists, I believe India's labor laws have got in the way. The way the labor laws are done, especially the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. And here there is a bit of a beautiful analytical point that you can make. What lots of people don't realize, India's labor law of 1947 is a pre-independence law, with the very interesting consequence. Pakistan and India were born with the same law, the two countries. Pakistan got rid of it in 1956, 56 or 57. Ayub Khan could not tolerate those laws for completely the wrong reasons. He wanted to use ruthless techniques with the Bangladesh or East Pakistan labor. He needed to get rid of the law, got rid of the law. But come to 1971, Bangladesh is being born without that law because it's inheriting the Pakistani law. And India is with the 1947 law. Bangladesh makes actually very good amendments to that law. Inherits it from Pakistan, the legacy is gone, begins to change the law. India is stuck with that. It's a political economy reason, complex reasons. And I think this has hurt India's industrialization. If that law could have been reformed, it would have been helped. So that's one detailed thing. The other thing is on the current kind of agricultural reform. Here, I was arguing throughout that you need to open up the markets. The farmers have to learn to take on the markets a bit more, not fully, but you have to allow that. The reforms that have taken place, the new laws that were brought in, I'm totally against them. I feel those laws have the correct headlines, opening up the markets, freeing up the markets, but beneath that, there's no attention being paid to what that will do to poor farmers. It's very, very insensitive to poor farmers. It will play into the hands of a few big businesses, not even 500 big businesses, in which case there would be competition, but a few big businesses. United States, capitalist market economy, for all these things, there's a huge debate about antitrust law. You don't want to have 500,000 farmers with 3 buyers facing the market. They will be completely, the extortion is going to increase. You have a whole lot of antitrust provisions in place. None of that was done. So the banner headline of the recent reforms sound right. But I think in this case, the farmers' intuition that they are going to be hurt is right. So I remain very skeptical for what has happened. But it is an important area. The agricultural sector is important. And I'm glad you've brought it up, but it's another topic for another day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So could you stop sharing your screen because people want to see your larger panel.
Larger, I can certainly do that.
Yeah.
Now,
Indra Kumar, I want to ask my question, but you did
that's fine. So you know, may I know who's? Yeah.
I'm Venkatesh Reddy, LV Reddy.
Please ask your question. Yeah.
Respected Professor Basu, kindly give your valuable opinion on demonetization process took place recently in India, and what is its impact on Indian economy and people on long term?
Did you say I missed the most important word? Is it demonetization?
Yes.
What is your view on the demonetization?
Yes.
No, I can tell you very clearly because I do have a clear view. Demonetization, I think, was completely wrong. And let me explain this to you. There is a lot of black money in India. You do want to go after that black money. First of all, a general principle which I want to point out that when I was in government also, I would get a lot of people coming restless about the corruption. And the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, with whom I would spend a lot of time, and it's no secret, I genuinely feel his intention was he would like to weed out the corruption. But what you have to be very careful about is corruption lives in a modern economy completely side by side with legitimate activity. So when I was in government, there would be groups coming and saying, why don't we investigate every Indian's account, international account? We will keep track of what's going in and out. To that, my response was trying to catch those illegal accounts, illegal money. If you do this, you will paralyze Indian international business because there'll be so much bureaucratic interference with legitimate business. And my analogy that I had used came to mind when the demonetization took place. I think the intention was right, but no economist would advise this, and it backfired. And the analogy I had used was this. When you do a surgery, a doctor does surgery, and you're trying to take out a malignant tumor, one huge part of the skill is not just the attack on the tumor, but not to damage healthy tissues around it. If you pay no attention to the healthy tissues and say that I'm just going to take out the bad tumor with everything else out, it's going to be a devastating damage on the patient. That's the reason why corruption control is very, very difficult. There are lots of corrupt people who want the corruption to continue, but there are also good, well-meaning people who find it very difficult, and we need determination and brain power. The demonetization was completely wrong because 86% of the currency in circulation is being halted. The economic ramifications of that is huge, and something which, to the credit of the chief economic advisor in government at that time, put out in the economic survey, if you go back immediately after the demonetization, there is a table which says that people are criticizing, saying that no other country has done this kind of demonetization, but actually there are 8 other countries have done a similar demonetization. And that table lists those 8 countries, and I can tell you the sum I remember. Venezuela has done this. Iraq has done this. North Korea has done this. You go through the list and you realize that it's a completely wrong group that you're belonging to. And the demonetization is exactly the mistake of trying to get at the black money, and you're paralyzing the entire system with no attention to the healthy tissues around that. And in the end, what happened is that virtually no black money was got also. So you didn't even get the tissue that you were after, you did big damage. And the damage is not just that immediately I feel growth did suffer from 2016, this I've written about several times, this has never happened before. From 2016 to 21, such a long period, every year, India's growth has been less than the previous year's growth. For so many years, it's never happened. We've had occasional cycles, 2-3 years of tripping down, but from 2016 every year. So it's having a long run effect. Also, what it has done is it diminished India's standing a little bit. This was a kind of move that you don't expect for a country like India. And again, this not for a moment am I diminishing the problem of corruption. You do want to take it out. But this is one area where determination with brain power and the brain power of scientists being brought in, you can begin to create schemes where it won't happen quickly. You can begin to cut into it. One more thing I'll tell you, since it's a lecture on the importance of morality. A lot of people are honest, not because of the threat of police and other things. It is a mindset. And I feel, one example which keeps striking me, that in some countries, if in a Scandinavian country, there's been a police street, something, or the police comes, I would immediately feel comforted that the police is coming. In India, if I'm alone in a highway, I've had a crisis and the police comes, I'll actually feel nervous that the police is arriving on the spot because I'll be asked for a bribe or something. How do you cure this? Economists will immediately begin to say that create incentives, better pay for the policemen, rewards. I don't think so. I feel making them aware of the dignity of their job. People do many things because you feel an honor in doing this job. This we are not doing enough. The civil servants, the bureaucrats should feel a bit impassioned that they are doing a job where a part of that is giving them honor and stature in society. If you have that, you'll do it better. One example I used to think of, Delhi School of Economics in my early days. Teacher absenteeism, in India is a big problem in schools. And people would say, give them more pay, higher pay, incentive. And I used to look at Delhi School of Economics, where those days, no one monitored whether you took your class or not. It was very easy for me not to do. But everyone did. Virtually everyone did. Why? Because we took that as that itself was the honor. It's not the money that I'm taking. It's my job. It's an honor that I'm doing. We don't play that role at all. It's a mindset development. So along with the laws and regulations, we have to pay attention to this.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much. Wonderful information. Thank you very much.
So, Kishore, one or two YouTube questions before.
Yes. There is a question from Chandrasekhar on YouTube. The question is the Samaritan's curse an example of a situation where the Pareto optimal solution is a terrible solution?
No. Let me explain this. The Pareto optimal solution, I'll give you the definition for the audience of a Pareto optimal, meaning of Pareto optimality. A society has many feasible things. I can be well off, I can be poor, someone else can be well off, someone else can be poor. So take the set of all the payoff n tuples. There are n people and there's a payoff n tuple is the incomes we earn, all the possible ones. Pareto optimality is the following. Since I didn't want to inflict this on you since the question is being asked. A Pareto optimal n tuple in the feasible set is an n tuple of welfare such that there does not exist another n tuple where some people are better off and no one is worse off. If another such n tuple exists, then this one is not optimal. Is this clear? So utility is earned by everyone in India. If I can think of another utility vector where some people are happier and no one is worse off, then the current vector of utilities is not optimal. A Pareto optimal society is a society where it's not possible to create a better vector. That does create problems. Pareto optimal society, you can think of a slave society, a society with slavery is arguably a Pareto optimal society. The wealthy people are exploiting the slaves so much that they've become so well off that it's not possible to make them any better off. That's Pareto optimal. And over here, this is a criticism that has been widely made in economics. It's not criticism. Once you're aware, you realize that Pareto optimal is not synonymous to a good society. Pareto optimal is a technical term of comparisons of vectors. That's the way we economists treat it. But outsiders, as soon as they hear the word optimal, think it's being recommended by the. But now come back to the Samaritan's curse. The Samaritan's curse backfires. It's suboptimal, not in this obnoxious sense of Pareto optimality, but literally the poor person becomes worse off. So when everyone tries to make the poor person better off, the poor person becomes worse off. So that is a backfiring of morals that all of us would feel. This should not happen. And in fact, the individuals who have become moral, they themselves, if they call a meeting, and if they could talk in a civilized way, they will say, look, it's done exactly the opposite of what you were trying, what I was trying. The bystander is worse off. And this is the analogy that I was taking too, that in life, this is happening often, leaders squabbling among themselves. And rarely happens that political leaders are moral, but there are some. Politically moral leaders squabbling among themselves can have an effect, where if they had that further greatness, they would be able to say, let us sit down at a table and talk, because we are doing harm to the people that we were trying to benefit. So no, this is not the Paretian sense in which I was using the term.
Kishore, one more question?
Yeah, one more question. Okay, this is a question from B. Anita. In practice, a society without morals would be the one with extreme power disparities between different groups. Examples could be societies with high corruption, cartels, etc., or places with caste-based or political violence in India. Have you looked into empirical evidence from these examples to see if they support your hypothesis?
Well, Anita, I don't have a hypothesis really about the world. My paper is a theoretical paper showing that good morals can backfire. What you're pointing to, that without morals, you would get a dreadful society, I have no doubt about that. Actually, if you take away all morals, we will be back to the society of animals. I mean, human beings have progressed, not because of the central bank and the Ministry of Finance doing things, but because we've developed a modicum of morals is a part of our thinking. That's what, and this goes back to David Hume and others writing that human society is made possible by this reciprocity. I'll do something good for you, you do something good for me, respecting one another. These things have played a role. Take them away, leave us with all the other traits, selfishness we want to build up. We will be fighting and jostling with one another and causing a complete collapse. And some primitive societies have not been able to develop because they have not been able to develop these little moral compasses. But I was making the contrary point that yes, those morals are essential, but it is not that more morals, the better. Unfortunately, the world is a more complex place. There are situations where you bring in morals that can actually begin to backfire, make society worse off. And so if our intention is a better world, we need to occasionally get together and put on our scientific hat and say that this is what I want to do. This is not a hypothesis where I run to a village and do experiments. There's no experiment to be done. I'm showing with some numbers that you can create a realistic set of a game. I can put it in a laboratory immediately. Economists now do a lot of lab tests and do it, but I pretty much know what's going to happen in the lab. So I wouldn't even waste my time with anything empirical at this stage. But we need to sort out our thinking on this important topic.
Well, I'm sure there'll be more and more questions, but it's getting on in the evening, certainly in India. Would you like to say something, Dipan? And
yeah, it was a fantastic talk, and thank you, Professor Basu. And Ravi, you may probably.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to see if Ramki wanted to say something.
No, I think I really enjoyed this talk, and of course, it makes the life a little more difficult now. And you are clearly saying that, the Good Samaritans will not prosper completely. So I need to rethink about even administrations also in this fashion. So thank you very much for opening my mind to this, which I have never thought of it before. Thank you, Professor Basu.
So, Professor
Just
Basu,
wanted to add one thing, that Professor Basu, when next time you are in IIT for your assignment, I think we would certainly like to have you in our Kulava campus, because
I would love
this has been great.
Certainly, yes.
Well, last year,
you are most welcome. I hope COVID goes away, and certainly you are most welcome to TIFR and spend time with us.
And I any day prefer real interaction to Zoom interaction, so I will come.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
My last thing, Professor Basu, mostly human values and human ethics are missing, and selfish thing is taking predominantly, and dishonesty is taking predominantly. So
Sadly, yes.
Well, Yes, yes.
Thank you very much for a wonderful talk.
Yeah. So I'd like to say that it's been an absolutely scintillating, I just didn't notice. We've been here at it for about 1 hour, 45 minutes, and I'm sure we can go for equal amount of time if you are not committed otherwise today. So it's a great delight, and I think we've done just the right thing by inviting you to speak on this occasion. And so on behalf of everyone at TIFR, on the TIFR Alumni Association, and everyone here hearing across the world, I think it's a big thank you for the great effort that you put in to make complex things very, very exciting and interesting. And some food for thought, lots of food for thought, that we think just being nice to somebody need not actually help that person. We should think carefully about the consequences. I think this is a lesson that all of us will carry now. So thanks very much. And before I conclude, I just want to thank everyone who has made this lecture possible at TIFR. And so have a great day. And thank you very much for joining us today. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Yeah.